Infinity. Online survey April 2014 of 510 Infinity customers.
It's 9 o'clock across the UK.
The checks that we have in terms of passengers who go on aeroplanes, how they're scrutinised, how they're checked, is, in the jargon, it's sort of multi-layered. I don't think we should expect this to be just a sort of one-off temporary thing.
The most talked about radio show is here.
Hello, Jess.
Hello.
Hello, how old are you?
I'm 12.
Oh, brilliant.
Do you think that the MPs set a good example in the House of Commons by calling and shouting at each other?
If you're talking about Prime Minister's questions, I think Prime Minister's questions I personally think it's just increasingly becoming a total farce. I really do.
Call Clegg. Your direct line to Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Get straight through now. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's 9 o'clock on Friday the 11th. And that means it's time for Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC. So do get in touch in the next half an hour if you want to get involved. Call on 0345 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And, of course, you can watch on the website lbc.co.uk. So the first caller, Ian in Harrow. Hello, Ian.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning.
Just talking about these supposed privacy concerns about internet service providers keeping data records.
Yeah.
So I've been in the industry for years, and I consider that we've been keeping records for between 6 and 12 months anyway, so that people can query their bills. If you think about it, if you go online on your service provider, you can look at your old bills, so they keep the data anyway.
Yeah.
So isn't this far more about the EU sticking its nose in where it isn't wanted and trying to tell us to do something dumb, and then the government having to spend time and money legislating to undo the damage that the EU is trying to do, something we've already done?
This is the EU ruling, Deputy Prime Minister. Explain to listeners who need to catch up on this.
Sure. No, so, Ian, as you know, but you're lucky in the sense that you understand the complexities of all of this, and lay people like me, I've sort of had to get my head around it over the last several months. So I'll try and explain it as best I can. As you quite rightly say, there was law, rather, and it flowed from an EU directive, which basically said that telephone companies could keep data, and the data, by the way, is, as you know, the telephone number, when a call was made, to whom, to which other number the call was made. It's not nothing to do with the content. It was the directive, the European law, was all about how telephone companies keep that data for a certain period of time for business purposes. It's exactly right, Ian. So, and you're quite right. It's one of the many misapprehensions about this. So the existing law was all about the business needs for telephone companies, but of course that created that data store, if you like, which then also, under appropriate proportionate powers and so on, the police and the intelligence agencies can ask for some of that data where it's justified. Now, as it happened, the original European law said that every different European country could decide to set the time during which that data is stored from 6 months, I think it was, to 24 months. And the previous Labour government, decided to set it at 12 months in this country. In other countries, it's slightly different. What we didn't do, or rather what the previous government did not do, unlike other EU member states, was translate that directive into domestic primary legislation, so it stands in British law. So, for instance, Denmark has done that. So then came along this court ruling a few weeks ago, 3 months ago, which you're alluding to, Ian, and the court ruling, for various reasons, said that the directive was faulty, and so the whole thing had to be scrapped. So it meant for countries like Denmark, that was not a problem because they'd already done the homework of translating it into domestic legislation. We hadn't, so we had this void. So the telephone companies quite reasonably came to us and said, we now have no legal basis in Britain, because the directive has been sort of struck down, to retain this data, never mind for security purposes, but also for our own business purposes. And that's why we need to take this action pretty quickly, very unusual, in order to maintain, as I think you'll know, Ian, to maintain something that's been going on, frankly, for many, many years, and that hasn't really been very fundamentally challenged by anyone for many years. And that was very important to me, to make very clear to people that we are just maintaining something that's been going on for a very long period of time. We're not extending surveillance powers in any way.
Ian?
So if this is all down to the EU not being able to get its legislation right. Exactly how much is it costing us to run this legislation through Parliament just because the EU made a mistake? And are you planning to recover this money from the huge amount of money that we pay to the EU to apparently get things wrong?
Well, OK, we're probably sort of gliding into a different debate here. I can't tell you, Ian, how much it's going to cost to have the emergency legislation adopted in Parliament next week. As it happens, I don't think... I think you and I probably going to part company on the EU, perhaps not on data communications. I don't think that I think the evidence is overwhelming that the benefits, what we get as a country in terms of jobs and money and tax revenues and so on, far outweighs the kind of ticket price we pay for being member of the European Union. And I don't actually think it is wrong to have a system in the European Union of checks and balances, so that a law is passed in this case, and that judges, in response to people challenging that law, can, as they have done in this case, it was unexpected, by the way, I don't think anyone expected this to happen, can, in extreme cases, strike down the law altogether. That is part of the checks and balances of any kind of grown-up way of taking decisions, that yes, governments and parliaments can pass laws, but they can be challenged in courts as well.
Just on this, you said yesterday in the joint press conference you'd been persuaded. How much persuasion did it take from Mr Cameron?
It wasn't so much for Mr Cameron, but it was more, as I say, everyone was quite taken by surprise by this court ruling. And then a parallel...
But why now, Mr Clegg?
Right, well, for the reasons that I've explained earlier. So the telephone companies have said, we can't, and this is perfectly reasonable from their point of view, they cannot store stuff without a legal basis to do it.
But haven't you insisted that it ends in 2016?
Yes.
So if it's important in 2014, why isn't it important in 2016?
So let me explain. So what has happened in parallel is that a number of communication service providers, big internet companies, many of whom are American, have raised questions about a separate issue, entirely separate, which is if you like the much harder end of surveillance powers, which is the right of the intelligence agencies on our behalf to keep us safe in exceptional circumstances on the basis of a warrant signed by a Secretary of State to intercept a telephone call or an email, to actually listen so you can hear the content. And that is incredibly important to keep us safe. It needs to be done in a highly kind of proportionate way and so on. Lots of checks and balances. But
they listen to the actual content of the conversation, do they?
Yes, this is called legal. So one communications data, which Ian and I talked about, so that's one thing, right? Then separately, a equally urgent need for legal clarification has arisen around what is called legal intercept, which is, in other words, the power of the intelligence agencies to intercept communications. Because, it gets terribly legally complicated, because there is uncertainty in this kind of global internet world about where one jurisdiction sort of ends and another one starts. Because, you and I could have an email correspondence with each other. Just for the listeners, we don't, but
yes.
we could.
Actually, we do need to make that plain.
And let's say if that was of interest,
yeah.
It wouldn't be, for the intelligence agencies, that would nonetheless be a service provided to us as two people here in Britain, but from a company abroad, right? So there's just a legal issue there about where the intelligence agencies have every right to try and intercept that conversation, that communication between residents here in the United Kingdom in a service provided to us as people living in the United Kingdom, but the company is located elsewhere. And so, in other words, that uncertainty is creating quite a kind of urgent need to clarify exactly the scope of the law. Again, it doesn't add new powers. All we're doing, and we're doing it in a very, very small bill, is putting beyond doubt that the existing powers can continue to operate. So, as you can hear, quite a lot of this is quite techie, quite complex. Yes. You need some time to look at the implications. In these court proceedings, we first needed to decide, A, what is the nature of the problem? Then, did the solution to the problem require legislation? We decided that eventually it did. It needed to happen quickly. If we waited till the autumn, a lot of this stuff would just fall off the edge of a cliff. That would leave us much more vulnerable to attack and to violence and to extremist violence and so on. And then, of course, we had this separate debate, which is what you just asked me about, which is how do you make sure after the next Parliament, because you're not going to be able to deal with all these complex issues on the hoof, because there are big issues of principle about the internet, the national jurisdictions, the balance between privacy and security. How do we get that right in a kind of grown-up, balanced, considered way? And that's why I said, OK, let's extend this stuff for a couple of years, but use that time to have that bigger debate that I've been calling for ages, so that we can finally, hopefully, arrive at a consensus about what powers do remain on the statute book and what checks and balances there are to keep our privacy and civil liberties protected as well.
I know we don't have a full half hour with you, so we have pressing engagements.
Yep, Shakita in Earls Court. Hello, Shakita.
Hi, Nick.
Hello.
This is regarding the electronic devices at the airport. So I'm a little concerned that we have broadcasted our security efforts and tactics for the world to see. This includes terrorists, and I feel this gives them the opportunity to change their tactics, even invent new ways of reaching their goal. So I just wanted to know from you, was broadcasting our concerns for the world in such detail, even highlighting participating airports, the safest way to go forward?
Good point, Shakita. And look, it's the thing that we've just had echoes of it actually in this conversation earlier about surveillance powers, data communications, and so on. Is how do you keep our society open and free and people's privacy protected and all the kind of things and the values that we cherish when we're dealing with people who, in the shadows, if you like, are constantly innovating and trying to come up with ways to do us harm. And so when you deal with kind of people who in secret are seeking to develop ways of doing us harm, how do you keep our society open, I guess is the thing in the nutshell. And what you're asking about, Shakita, is that there's now been guidance given to all of us if we get onto certain flights to ensure that the electronic gadgets we've got, iPads, laptops, mobiles, are charged, because some travellers will be asked to show that the thing they're carrying on board works.
And Shakita's saying, are we showing too much of our hand?
Well, but Shakita, the thing is, you can't keep that secret. That's the point. You can't, once you've asked passengers to do that, people know. So you might as well be open about the fact that those are going to be the nature of the check. You can't...
And it'll be here forever, will it, Mr. Clegg?
Well, we talked about this last time. I'm not going to try and put a sell-by date on it because, as I said, this is in response to intelligence about the kind of ways in which people who want to do us harm might seek to do us harm. Obviously, using electronic goods as a way to carry or potentially carry explosives. Now, I simply cannot predict whether the technology will evolve in a different way, whether there'll be new threats by which they seek to do so. So I don't think I should try and provide false comfort to people that somehow we're all going to suddenly return to a pre-9/11 world where you don't have to have a sort of shifting mosaic of checks particularly at our airports.
How concerned should we be that some of the budget airlines are choosing not to implement these new measures?
Well, I'm not clear about whether budget airlines can escape the airport-based checks, because that's not up to the airlines as such. That's up to the airport authority.
So you would recommend everybody then to make sure that they can switch their phones
it's
and
very
mobiles,
very clear. Anyone
laptops.
planning to particularly fly to the United States, but it's not just those flights, but particularly people flying to the United States. Just really, you just got to. There's a new reality, which is that if you turn up at an airport and your electronic gadgets and things are not charged up and you can't show that they work, you risk losing them.
Okay. Thanks very much, Shakita. We move on again. We've got to rattle through
Yes,
today.
Ash in Hendon. Hello, Ash.
Hi, good morning. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for having me on. My initial question is about Israel. My question is, how would Britain deal with the situation that Israel is going through, taking into consideration the size of Israel, the 60-odd years that it's come up and the way it's come up with technology and nuclear warfare has become one of the best countries with technology and nuclear warfare and all the rest of it. I've been looking at videos and how Israel is doing its best to tackle with the terrorism attacks and all the rest of it, how the Palestinians are using people as shields when Israel have to go and attack and get rid of the Hamas. The Palestinians are telling people to go on roofs and stay on roofs, and when casualties are happening, when deaths are happening, people are always pointing the finger on Israel.
Okay, let's get Mr. Clegg involved. Ash, down the line.
Ash, look, and it's so easy, of course, for all of us outside the Middle East to sort of try and pronounce with hindsight and distance on such an intractable conflict. on, as you quite rightly pointed out, Ash, such a tiny sort of area. I mean, geographically, this is such a concentrated...
Size of Wales, isn't it?
Gaza is, I think, the most overpopulated, crowded sliver of land anywhere on the planet. And you have deep animosities reaching back into history. You've got huge discrepancies of wealth and poverty. You've got generations fed on a diet of fear, and in some cases on a diet of extremism and hate as well. And I know this is easy to say, but I think it nonetheless remains true, which is that people I speak to on both the Palestinian and Israeli side of this conflict, most of them who I speak to understand that in the long run, the only way that they are going to serve their own people well is by trying to secure peace. You can't provide security without peace. And every time you get this spiral of violence, and we're seeing now, unfortunately, yet again, a spiral of violence, and, what do we learn? We learn that violence begets violence. And that is why I think it is so important. It feels very late in the day. It is so important that people do try and stick to the ambition of a two-state solution. There is strategic in the long run, there is no alternative. There is no alternative to the Palestinian people. There is no alternative to the Israeli people. So, the Palestinian characters who somehow don't even want to recognise the existence of Israel are clearly just plain wrong. And those characters, again, on the extremes of politics in Israel, who somehow think there is an alternative, and a sort of permanent military alternative to a two-state solution, I think they're wrong as well. And that is why we in Britain, the United States, the European Union, constantly need to try and play our role to foster the circumstances in which a two-state solution could be agreed.
What do both sides need to do, lastly, on this, Mr. Clegg?
Well, at the end of the day, they have to find a way of trying to communicate with each other, and they have to find a way of trying to resolve these outstanding issues, territorial issues, settlements, status of Jerusalem, status of refugees, and so on and so forth, to create a viable Palestinian state living in peace and fully recognising the right for Israelis to live in peace and security themselves as well.
All right, I'm going to take an email question here. This comes from Mike, who's in Dartford. Can you now accept that Vince Cable got it totally wrong with the Royal Mail and stop defending him?
I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to continue to defend Vince, because I think what you're seeing is a lot of wisdom with hindsight. The suggestion somehow Vince should have known what was going to happen to the... Well, hang on. I know you feel very insensitive about this, Nick. I know you do. But let me just get some...
I can understand. Unlike the Middle East, I can understand this.
Let me just get some points in. The share price was what was it? It was 330. Went up to then well over 600. It's now
615.
around. It's now dropped again by 25%.
474.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, you got it. So the point I'm trying to make is 330 up to 600, back to 4. Share prices gyrate wildly, and in fact, the Royal Mail's share prices have gyrated wildly, and I suspect will continue to do so. By the way, there's been a 25% drop in the share price. The idea that Vince Cable, wise though he is, should be a soothsayer and should have been able to predict that, I think is up. And by the way, what he's done in the process, he's given thousands of people working in the Royal Mail a stake in it. He's given millions of people the guarantee that the universal postal provision 6 days of the week will be provided across the whole of the country, and crucially, he's ensured that future taxpayers won't be on the hook for billions of pounds of further subsidies to the Royal Mail, which was the case in the past. So
your loyalty is to be commended. But if we sold at 330,
I try to be loyal at all times,
and you do very well.
Thank you.
But those two prices we mentioned, 615, 474, it's never been below 330. It's never even got anywhere near 330.
All right,
the Vince Cable described it as froth.
Can you
this
guarantee?
Panel of MPs.
Yes.
A panel of MPs have said that they shouldn't. That is ridiculous to describe it as froth. Vince Cable got it wrong.
Well, the panel of MPs, with all respect to those MPs, have also made suggestions in that report which are just factually wrong, just plain wrong. So they've, for instance, said that Vince should be able to publish exactly which investors have bought what and so on and so forth. The government doesn't have that information.
Right, I see.
And,
what were you going to challenge me to do, by the way?
I was going to challenge you to. So, can you guarantee that the share price of Royal Mail will always stay above 330?
How long have I got a guarantee for? How long do you want the guarantee for?
Well, I don't know. You take your pick. But can you guarantee that?
12 months. Done.
5 years.
Well, if I'm still alive. I'll go 3.
No, but
3 years, and if I'm wrong, I'll pay your mortgage. How about that? Do you want to shake on that?
No, listen, I'm waiting.
3 years, and I'll pay your mortgage.
I know the danger of your bets. Boris Johnson needs to fill his to be experimented on by a water cannon, so I'm not going to follow, which I hear apparently he's got now. So
they've just arrived. They arrived yesterday.
I'm not going to make the same. I'm not going to say
3 years, I'll
Boris
pay your
Johnson
mortgage.
water cannon mistake.
Won't go below 330.
The point I'm trying to make.
And your dad was a massive power in the city.
He wasn't a massive power.
He was.
The point I'm
he
trying
got
to...
duped. You got duped. Vince got duped.
The point I'm trying to make is that the advice that Vince received was advice from figures who make it their business to understand how you estimate what might happen to the share price, what the valuation of a company is. There was, by the way, some separate criticism in the report.
How big's your mortgage? just having a quick think.
Anyway, look, you know my point.
Right,
you cannot guarantee that it's going to be 330, and I think it's unfair. I think it's unfair for people
Vince
now
Cable.
to start vilifying Vince for somehow being able to predict the future when clearly he couldn't.
Vince Cable, Secretary of State for Business, Innovation and Skills. Is he any good at innovation? Because the other two are a bit questionable.
He's good at all three.
All right, we move. What's he ever innovated? We move on. Mr. Clegg, I think you have another call.
Yes, Pauletta in Sutton. Hello, Pauletta.
It's Paulette.
It's my writing.
Oh, sorry,
Paulette. It's my scribble. Yep.
Forgive me.
Yep, go on.
Right, there's been a lot on the news, and obviously Nick's been talking about it, about people having gastric bands and gastric bypasses on the NHS. Do you agree with it?
This will come in, I'll just remind the listeners, this will come in at around £6 billion, up to 1 million obese people qualifying for these gastric bans, gastric bypasses, typically £5,000 to £6,000 each. Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, so Paulette, I've got the name right. Paulette, if what NICE, so that's this body that kind of floats ideas about what the NHS should and shouldn't provide to us, the public. And by the way, they're doing is a consultation, right? So there's no decisions taken yet. So this independent body, if that independent body had said anyone who is overweight, was worried about the weight problems, can basically just go off to the local hospital, it'll be sorted for you. You don't have to take any responsibility for your own, for your own health. Then I think, frankly, all of us would think, well, hang on a minute, this is, with all the stresses and strains on the NHS. But the report from NICE was subtly different. It was about type 2 diabetes. And that is very important to remember. So it's not about weight as such, it's about the link between weight and type 2 diabetes. Now, I'm not a type 2 diabetes specialist, but my understanding is that NICE have said that there are circumstances in which weight reduction operations could help you either handle and sort of manage type 2 diabetes if you're a sufferer of it better, or even in some cases, which I was quite struck by because I didn't think this was possible, reverse the condition. So all I would urge is, before we all kind of understandably say, well, hang on, isn't it outrageous the NHS is just kind of help people with their weight management issues. Remember, this is about type 2 diabetes. It's not actually about just allowing people to go to the NHS because they can't or won't be prepared to deal with their own physical conditions.
Let's bring Paulette back into it. Paulette?
Well, the first thing is that people who get type 2 diabetes, I'm assuming, are mainly overweight. So it is, to a degree, self-inflicted. But I can't really say anything because I've had the gastric bypass.
Oh.
Was that related to diabetes or?
No, I didn't have diabetes at all.
Did you have that on the NHS?
I did.
Well, you see, your case is not actually the subject of this consultation from NICE. That's the only point I would make.
But there's no difference. But there is no difference. They do offer it on the NHS. But to me, it's no difference between them helping me to lose weight and someone stopping someone from smoking. It's about preventative rather than cure, isn't it?
Yeah, look. There's a bigger issue here, isn't there, Paulette? Which all of us kind of feel is that responsibility, individual responsibility, is an important thing in life. We can't just always ask other people to kind of sort out issues where we have a big role to kind of try and manage our own lives, but we also want the NHS to be there to support us all, to provide care free at the point of use. The dilemma, and it's a dilemma which is going to frankly hang over us, I think, for a long time, is so where do you draw the line? And that's where this debate, quite rightly, has now kind of come up today in the newspapers and so on. All I'm saying is, and I'm not going to comment on your own circumstances, Paulette, but I'm kind of reluctant to condemn a consultation document that I haven't read from top to toe, but crucially is about quite a serious health condition, which is type 2 diabetes.
Paulette, thank you again. We move on because we've only got another few
Terry
minutes.
in Billericay.
Oh, good morning, Nick.
Hello, Terry.
Thanks for taking the call.
That's right.
Children abuse, I'm sure you've had a load of it. People phoning in Westminster. Can I just ask you one quick question?
Sure.
Do you think there has been a cover-up in the past?
Terry, I genuinely don't know. All I do know is the allegations of a cover-up, the allegations of powerful people, powerful men, all men, not only organising amongst themselves to abuse children, but even more revoltingly then seeking to kind of like cover up for each other. And remember, this is the allegation, abusing some of the most vulnerable children you could possibly imagine. Children who don't have their own families, children who are in the care of the state. Precisely the children we should be going that extra mile to look after, to protect, to support, are being, this is the allegation, being preyed upon by powerful people who clearly then, in addition, instill such an intense sense of fear and intimidation in their victims. That is the allegation. I genuinely cannot think of an allegation of crimes which are more revolting, more heinous, and more in need, even these many years later, of proper investigation. I cannot tell you, of course, what happened until these things are properly looked at, and that's why you've got the police, and we've discussed this before, the police looking in it, you've got the investigations of the BBC, you've got the investigations in the NHS.
Well, and this new one with Baroness Butler, whose credibility and determination cannot be questioned, but surely the fact that her brother was the Attorney General at a time when it could be seen that we went rather lightly on a possible offender, the wisdom of giving Baroness Butler-Sloss this appointment, Mr. Clegg.
I think that's really unfair on her. I really do. I think I don't know her myself, but she is one of those unusual people in British public life whose integrity has always been viewed by everybody, and everybody at all sides. So
those muttering because her brother
I think the idea that because she had a brother in politics at that stage, somehow that disqualifies her from doing this work. And I think I don't accept that, and I think it's right that she has said that she's going to carry on doing the job. By the way, I also think it's immensely. I think it's really moving to see some people. My colleague Tessa Munt, a Liberal Democrat MP. She never obviously said this to me. No reason she should, by the way. It's entirely her life and her business. But she decided on the back of all of this to publicly say and to talk about the experience of abuse that she had suffered herself. I'm full of admiration for her because it's a bit like it's different, but it's a bit like. Do you remember a couple of years ago there was suddenly a number of MPs came forward and admitted for the first time they'd been struggling with mental health issues. Yeah. I think given that we're dealing with people who were, that's the allegation, were powerful in politics and were abusing children, I think that you've now got politicians like Tessa who are brave enough to bare their own soul and which must make her feel very sort of vulnerable, I think is such a powerful antidote to the fear and the silence which has so long allowed this terrible level of abuse to lurk in the shadows for so long.
We only have you for another minute, and let's just try and lift the mood. And I move you to the role you've been playing for us for the last few weeks as Mystic Clegg. Here was your prediction for England versus Italy.
Even in the heat, the tropical heat of Manaus, wherever it is, I predict a 2-1 victory for England. How about that?
That was, of course, Italy 2, England 1. Then we looked at the England-Uruguay game. Can we now get Mystic Clegg on what we will see tonight? Mystic Clegg, that's quite clever.
OK, 1-0 to England.
Yes.
I think it's going to be really tightly fought.
Yes, that was, of course, another victory to Uruguay. Last week we got you on the quarterfinals with, of course, the Netherlands, the other team you follow. The quarterfinal is on Saturday, Netherlands versus Costa Rica. Mystic Clegg, you've not got one right yet. A score prediction, if you would.
3-1 to the Netherlands.
On that bombshell...
2 goals by Van Persie.
Well, you got the winning team, but my God, it was a turgid game.
It was so
Mystic Clegg, who wins the World Cup on Sunday night?
Oh, Germany.
Oh, they do?
Yes.
Oh, right.
They do.
Okay.
Ja. Sicher.
Ach du Liebetzeit. For
they,
Germany,
no.
Your World Cup is over.
No, they do.
They'll be weeping in the streets.
I mean, the way they destroyed Brazil. I mean, it was. I was just reeling.
Right.
And my prediction against Argentina, 3-1 for Germany. 3-1.
3-1, right. Ach du Liebetzeit. Vielen Dank, Nick Clegg. Everybody put your money on Argentina. You're listening to LBC. Call Clegg comes to an end with Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg.
Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Lisa Aziz. The Deputy Prime Minister says Vince Cable had no way of knowing the Royal Mail sale had been undervalued. A panel of MPs has accused the Business Secretary of underestimating the demand for shares and losing taxpayers £1 billion. But Nick Clegg has told LBC he thinks the right decision was made at the time.
The panel of MPs, with all respect to those MPs, have also made suggestions in that report which are just factually wrong. Just plain wrong. So they've, for instance, said that Vince should be able to publish exactly which investors have bought what and so on and so forth. The government doesn't have that information.
Right.
Police in Brazil think a British executive who works with FIFA is on the run in Rio. Ray Whelan is accused of masterminding a multi-million-pound deal to illegally sell on World Cup hospitality packages. Officers found his hotel room empty with the television on and his clothes still in the room. CCTV showed him leaving via a service entrance. A former headmaster at Boris Johnson's old prep school has been arrested on suspicion of historic sexual assaults. The 69-year-old was in charge of Ashdown House Prep School in East Sussex for more than 25 years before leaving in 2003. He's now been released on bail. The Church of England's cut all ties with payday lender Wonga.